the first 3 episodes of a new Netflix documentary series about Prince Harry and Princess Meghan. Is she still a princess? They have dropped anyway. And right-wingers are freaking out. This was Mike Graham on Talk TV.
And we also know that no matter how much money you have, no matter what title you have, you can't buy class, because you two have got absolutely none of it. So thank you, on behalf of Great Britain, the United Kingdom, indeed, of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, of which you used to be a part, and which you are now trashing for money. Thank you, Harry, and thank you, Meghan, for proving just what worthless individuals you are. And good riddance. And I will repeat my call that I made earlier this year. Not only should you both be stripped of your royal titles, but Harry, you should be stripped of your British citizenship, because you clearly don't like this country, you clearly hate this country, and quite frankly, we don't really want you back.
Prince Harry getting the Shamima Begum treatment there on Talk Radio. Mike Graham wasn't the only right-winger to get hot under the collar after watching the documentary. Piers Morgan in The Sun asked this: does Harry seem so unhappy because he knows he's been manipulated by a family wrecker into leaving everything he loved? I'm sure that's a heartfelt question, and he really cares about the answer. The front page of the Mirror was this: stop this royal circus. And they're very furious that this is happening just 2 months after the Queen died. Never to be outdone, Douglas Murray in The Telegraph wrote, America's race-obsessed elites have declared war on British institutions. And a big part of that article is the Meghan and Harry documentary. So what has got all these right-wingers so furious? What about the Netflix documentary did they hate so much? Well, we're not going to show you clips from the documentary, unfortunately. Netflix paid the Sussexes £100 million for the footage. So we're predicting they're going to be pretty tight on copyright rules. But we do have some quotes from the show. They're all from Prince Harry here. So he said, "This is about duty and service, and I feel as though, being part of this family, it is my duty to uncover this exploitation and bribery that happens within our media. That press pack of royal correspondence is essentially just an extended PR arm of the royal family." He also accused the royals of unconscious bias. In this family, sometimes you're part of the problem rather than part of the solution. And there is a huge level of unconscious bias. That thing with unconscious bias is it's actually no one's fault. But once it's been pointed out or identified within yourself, you then need to make it right. It's education, it's awareness, it's a constant work in progress for everybody, including me. As far as a lot of the family were concerned, everything she was being put through, they had been put through as well. So it was almost like a rite of passage. Some of the members of the family were like, my wife had to go through that, so why should your girlfriend be treated any differently? And then I said the difference here is the race elements. That's what Prince Harry said in that situation. And this is the comment that to me seemed particularly harsh. For so many people in the family, especially the men, there can be a temptation or an urge to marry someone who would fit the mold as opposed to someone who you were perhaps destined to be with, which is difficult to read as anything other than a comment about his brother.
It's impossible to have a conversation about Harry and Meghan, in part because of the viciousness and the hysteria of that right-wing backlash. So you've got Mike Graham saying strip Prince Harry of his, British citizenship, like he's gone overseas to fight for ISIS in Raqqa. I mean, they've lost all sense of proportion. And there's a delicious irony, though not one that they're aware of, that you've got so many of these right-wing free speech campaigners absolutely losing their minds when you've got individuals exercising their right to free speech in a way which isn't even that threatening to the establishment. Do you know what I mean? This is the most liberal of liberal idpol. It's, really quite tame stuff by our political standards. And so because of that viciousness, then it puts you in this defensive crouch where, because Harry and Meghan are being attacked because of their perceived disloyalty to the royal family, the fact that they're lifting the lid on some of the realities of how the UK press operates, and also because of the racial dynamic, you feel like, okay, well, you kind of have to be on their side because that's the side of anti-racism, or that's the side of media critique, or, that's the side of wanting to be honest about the royal family I really like. It means that you miss out on what some of these realities are. So the reality is that these are 3 hours of some of the most self-indulgent, self-aggrandizing documentary making I've ever seen in my life. These are 2 people who really have bought into a lot of their own myth. It is absolutely saturated with this kind of, Instagram pseudo self-help / anti-racist language in a way which I'm sure, has had some meaning for them on their particular journeys, but I don't think is necessarily always that revealing or insightful. There was an interesting moment where, Harry talked about the fact that he had worn a Nazi costume at a costume party. And I think the theme of that party, if I recall correctly, was a colonizer's costume party. And he talked about, learning and growing from it, meeting with the chief rabbi in London, meeting with a Holocaust survivor. And the thing that he maybe didn't mention is that that was a really racist party. Even if you didn't go dressed as a Nazi, that would have been a racist theme. That also when he was in the army, and the army, of course, was spoken of in absolutely glowing terms. He referred to a fellow soldier as a packy and a raghead. And so the reason why he doesn't talk about those things is because then it would actually mean that he had to be critical of institutions that he still felt some kind of affinity for, i.e., the army, and thinking about the way in which Islamophobia and racism, which is targeted at South Asians and Muslims, plays out in the army, is not something that he's willing to do. So in terms of an intervention on race politics, this is an extremely limited documentary series. But there were a couple of things that I thought were interesting, if not wholly revealing. One is that you had an assemblage of talking heads, which included Kayinde Andrews, who I believe has been on Tiskisawa a couple of times. You had Afua Hirsch, who is the author of British, and you also had David Olusoga, who is a researcher who has done some really incredible work on the reparations who are paid to slave owners by the British state after the abolition of slavery. Now, some of the most spicy critiques of the royal family's role in colonialism come from these talking heads. And one of the things that's really striking is that it's not just about the royal family's history of colonialism, but there's also critique of the Commonwealth as it exists today. So Afua Hirsch talks about the Commonwealth as a kind of Empire 2.0. And another talking head mentions that, well, yes, we've got a Commonwealth where we're supposed to be this family of nations headed up by first the Queen and now, of course, King Charles. But when you look at the conditions that Black people in those Commonwealth countries have to live under, it's still very much a one-way relationship. Britain gets to keep its status, but you haven't had a huge improvement of living standards for Black people in those countries. So that is going a lot further than the things which have already been said about race in the royal family by Harry and Meghan themselves, in terms of a senior member of the royal family expressed concerns about how dark Archie's skin was, or the fact that Princess Michael of Kent, whose father was an SS officer, by the way, turned up to a Christmas lunch where she'd be meeting Meghan for the first time wearing an Orinoco brooch, a blackamoor brooch. I mean, like, do you know how racist you have to be to own racist jewelry? Like, crazy. So I think that the fact that those critiques are in there is interesting, but I'm really worried about the poster children for anti-Blackness in British society being Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. These are two incredibly wealthy, privileged individuals. And you look at the deaths that we've had in police custody or following police contact, the fact that, Chris Kabar's family are still waiting for justice. Chris Kabar, who was killed in South London by police, he was shot dead. And there's been all sorts of misinformation put out about the circumstances of that death. The police initially claimed that there was a car chase. Now they are not. They're saying that there was no car chase. At the death of Sheku Bayo in Scotland, who was restrained by police and who died. You have all sorts of discrepancies and differences in outcomes, whether that's in the employment market, or whether that's, the way Black women are treated in terms of their access to maternity health care. And it really does concern me that, Meghan and Harry, as difficult as I'm sure their experiences have been for them, aren't representative of the fact that for most people, racism and classism are really intimately bound up. Racism doesn't just manifest in prejudicial behavior or unkind comments or, stereotyping or indeed slurs and violent attacks. It also manifests in the whole litany of indignities and suffering that comes with poverty and forms of poverty you're more likely to experience on the basis of your race. So I worry about the amount of space this takes up in the public conversation, and enjoy it for the tittle tattle that it is. Look at it for insight in terms of what's going on when it comes to the royal family drama. Just don't think of it as the new frontier in anti-racist struggle.